Okay, so it is now 1 or 2 minutes after 12 o'clock. So we'll get started. There'll be some more people who log in, I think, as we go. But let's take care of just a couple of housekeeping items to begin with. First of all, thank you to all of you state workers for all that you do. I know this time has been extremely taxing for everyone, and we certainly appreciate more than when we say appreciation of State Employees Month. We mean it a lot more here at the credit union than we probably have in the past. We know that you're all working very hard. So thank you very much. And one other housekeeping item we have to go over is that we did send out one sheet. It's just one of the slides that will be featuring about 8 slides in. It is the machine, I guess, that we're going to refer to when we talk about retirement income planning. We'll go over a few slides before then just to kind of get braced and prepped for looking at this pie chart that I sent out. Just keep in mind, we'll reference that in just a few slides. I'll let you know. But to get started, this seminar is retirement income planning. Some of you were present last year when we did it in person. I wish we could do that. Unfortunately, we all know why we aren't able to meet in person. My jokes are probably going to fall on deaf ears, so I'll try to work through that and pretend that you're all. Pretend there's a laugh track or something. So to get started, I will tell you right now that retirement income planning, we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask you to think about this subjectively. This is a little different presentation than last year. I've had a couple of runs at it since then to sort of hone it a little bit more. Your retirement is a very subjective process, and I'll ask you to think about it subjectively to start with, and then we'll actually get into some objective approaches that are more industry standards and sort of best practices for how to pursue planning your income in retirement. We're going to ask you the basic questions. We'll have you think about those basic questions today. We'll ask you to think about what retiring early means to you and what would delaying your retirement mean in terms of the financial impact. Some people want to work part-time once they retire. Start the conversation there, and there are some questions you want to ask yourself and some things you have to consider if you're going to consider working and staying busy even after you officially retire. Most of today is going to be spent going over that 5-stage or 5-piece pie chart that was sent. It's not proportional. There's no percentages. It really is. Each of these pieces are equally important as stages of planning for your actual retirement. We only have an hour. This is a presentation that could go several hours, so I'm going to try to hit the most important points, and then if there's questions, you can all reach out to me afterwards in some way, shape, or form, and I'll answer those individually for you if there's something you feel like I needed to go over a little bit more thoroughly. So the first thing I have to show you is this disclaimer. I actually have to have this up, so take a look at this for a few seconds. And I think just based on what's said in that disclaimer, it's important that when you sit down and you meet with a financial representative like myself, you have to understand that you're not talking about the same things that you would be typically with a banker. The insured deposit program, it doesn't apply to your advisor. There are some things that advisors can do or consultants can do that are insured, but you need to make sure you know the distinction between those products and what you're talking about. So back to retirement, basic questions. What does retirement mean to you? That's the subjective part of this. What does it look like? Does it look like you're going to sit on the beach like the slide shows, watch the waves come in and enjoy each other's company? When do you plan on starting this process? Are you going to volunteer? Are you going to start a new business? What are you going to do with your time that you've worked so hard to get to? I will tell you that when you think about what it means to you, it's often tempting to look at your neighbors and judge that, get an idea of what retirement might mean by looking at other people. Just remember, it is very subjective. It is something that you have to come up with on your own, and happiness depends upon you living out your retirement and not trying to match what other people are doing. When you plan to retire is really important because your retirement is hopefully going to last a long time. and we'll talk about how people are living a lot longer. And so retirement, when you turn off your greatest asset, which is your ability to earn an income, when you turn that off, what does that time look like, and how long do you have to try to cover your income needs for that time, which is the purpose of this seminar today. So if you want to retire early, what you have to consider is that you'll have fewer years to accumulate your own savings for retirement. It makes sense. A lot of this is really common sense, but it is important to think about, if I turn off my income and I'm age 50, I had fewer years with which I was working in order to accumulate what I would need to get me through my whole life. That is also talked about as a longer distribution period. So there's longer time with which you have to take income in order to get through your retirement years. If you retire early, what kind of impact does that have on Social Security? You can take it early. You can retire early, and you can also draw Social Security early. You can wait till your full age of retirement, or you can delay retirement until age 70. And that's a specific calculation that you'll want to get into with a professional to determine when you want to start drawing Social Security. If you draw Social Security at 62, you may still have a gap. We'll talk about how income gaps occur up until the age of 65 when you're eligible for Medicare. Some people want to retire early, but they will have to cover that. Typically, they'll have to cover that on their own until they get to the age of 65. And then this is particularly important to this audience today. With the state of North Dakota, there's a pension component for most of you. That benefit and what you make once you retire is determined by how long you've actually worked for the state. So your crediting method, if you choose to early retire, may be impacted in that your higher income earning years are typically those later years of your employment. So if you're going to retire early, it may could impact greatly what the amount of income that you would take from your pension going forward. If you delay retirement, you're going to have those accumulation years. You'll have more of those accumulation years to save more money. You'll have a shorter distribution period, meaning you're closer to your death when you actually retire later. That's common sense, but you'll have less time with which to cover with some other form of income other than earned. We talked about your impact on Social Security. The reality is that you can earn more from Social Security by waiting, but there is a calculation, as I said earlier, that you want to consider before you decide on taking it early, waiting till full retirement, or delaying it. And of course, impact on healthcare. If you delay your retirement and wait till 65, Medicare kicks in. It's less stress on your income needs for retirement. Working during retirement. If you decide to work during retirement, it can impact the demands on your personal savings. In other words, you're earning money in retirement, so you don't need to pull from your savings retirement accounts on a regular or at least to the same degree. So that's a big deal. You can actually keep your access to healthcare in place by working a certain number of hours. We're seeing employers letting people work reduced number of hours in order to keep their healthcare. It's one of those ways to sort of ease yourself into retirement. And then, of course, we've talked about Social Security. The non-financial benefits to working past retirement would be that some people like the social aspects. Some spouses want the other one to not retire fully. They don't want them around as much. So there are reasons people continue to work during the quote-unquote retirement years. Stay busy, stay active. There's a lot of mental health benefits to staying busy. And some people choose to stay in a working situation where they're earning income for that reason. We are seeing phased-in retirement programs where, again, you work a couple of hours a week or 10 hours a week, and you can get your health care still paid for by your former employer, or even if it's a new employer. But there is an understanding that people need to the cost of healthcare going up as much as it is exponentially over the years. There is a problem with retiring early. You can get to a point where your healthcare just costs too much. So you have to stay stay busy doing something that earns income or at least provides that healthcare benefit. How long will retirement last? We're living longer. If you're going to answer that question, you have to tell me exactly when you're going to pass away. That's hard to do, but it's necessary to think about. You have to look at your mortality, and you have to think about what happened with my parents, grandparents, and other people within my family. But I will tell you this, even though that's a good measure for how long you're going to live, it's becoming less and less important, because you have to realize people are living a lot longer. The average 65-year-old American can expect to live another 19.5 years. What we're actually seeing is that it's not uncommon for people to expect to be able to live in retirement as many years as they worked. And with healthcare advantages in healthcare, advancements in healthcare, and some of the technological advancements, we are seeing people live a lot longer than even their parents did. And that's going to continue to increase. So I was talking to a brain surgeon a few years ago, and we were both born in 1976, and he told me kind of off the cuff, we were outside his house looking at a landscape, and he said to me that we were born in 1976. We're probably the last generation that will not be guaranteed to live to be 100. In other words, that medical advancements are occurring so quickly in the health field that it's really incomprehensible to think about the fact that kids that are born today or or subsequent generations to those Gen Xers like myself are going to be able to expect to live, well into their 90s and beyond. And that creates a problem. It's a nice problem to have to live that long, provided you're comfortable, but it is a problem because money can run out, and that's where we have to come in and do some important planning. So every retirement income plan has to balance three main goals. You have to maximize your ability to enjoy retirement, manage the risk of outliving your income, which we just talked about, and then manage the risk of unexpected life events. And we all know what those are: illnesses, the need to go into a nursing home, say there's an injury, you can't function the same way that you used to. And so all of these things that can happen will require funds to be in place to help offset the expense of that. So now we're to the slide that talks about the retirement income planning process. Now, this particular part of this presentation could go hours, so I want to make sure everyone is aware. We're just going to go ahead and populate this all the way through. This is the one-sheeter that we sent to you that we want you to be able to reference. And I did this presentation before, and I was trying to keep people, get notes, write this down, take it down. So we thought it would just be better to send this out separately to you so that you can reference it throughout. And I'm going to be real clear on what section we're talking about and why it fits in there so that people don't get lost. Because when I ran through it initially, it was really, found myself getting off in the weeds and not even able to track it myself. So this should help. This should help immensely. The first piece of the pie is estimate how much income you'll need. If there's an action item for today, if there's something that you should take away from today that you can do, it is to sit down and estimate how much income you'll need in retirement. Now that's a really hard thing to do because we don't know how much things are going to cost. But I would say that if you can get a handle on what your expenses are right now today, and you can gauge how old you are, it is possible to do a quick calculation to figure out. We know what inflation is, 2% a year on average, 2.3%. So you can back out what your income needs might be when you're 65 to 75 to 85, et cetera. It's a little bit of a moving target, but it is something that I would encourage everyone to do as part of the process of sitting down and be, participating in this seminar. The second part that we'll talk about in detail is you have to consider the major factors. And I've already mentioned inflation, cost of goods going up, buying power being reduced. I have a 5-question economics exam that my children have to pass. It sounds crazy and it sounds boring, but they have to pass before I'll allow them out of the house, per se. Of course, that's not true, but I do want them to understand how inflation works. I want them to know how time value works with money, compounding of returns. They have to understand what opportunity cost is if I buy something and it does this in terms of growth, and I could have bought this and it would have done more. The difference is opportunity cost. And I talk about these things every day when I meet with people as we're doing this very process of income planning for retirement. You have to consider your total income from Social Security and pensions. Back to state workers, again, thank you for your service. You are one of the rare groups that still have a pension for the most part. They are going away, and if you're familiar with the whole three legs to the income retirement planning process, Social Security, pension, and your own savings, you'll see that, you'll find out that with each passing day, we have fewer and fewer people with pensions, and Social Security becoming less viable for covering expenses in retirement. Not that it's going to go away, but Social Security will probably start paying out later for subsequent generations, and it will be able to likely cover less of their needs. So that puts a lot of pressure on that one leg of the retirement planning stool, which is your own personal savings. Then you have to identify the gap if you're going to retire early. So what is the difference between, or if you're going to retire and your income doesn't, your income from those other two sources doesn't actually support what you need for expenses. The last part of this is use the savings to bridge the gap. So keep this in front of you. We'll proceed into the meat and potatoes of the presentation right now. We'll start with digging in a little bit on estimating how much income you'll need. So initially, everyone's been told historically, you need to save 60 to 90% of your pre-retirement income. Okay, so these general guidelines are really easy to figure out or easy to apply. You know, if I made $100,000 in my last year of employment, I need $60,000 to $90,000 in order to be able to live in retirement. It's not that easy. Everybody's situation is unique and specific. And again, we have to avoid this temptation to look and talk and hear what our neighbors or families or friends are doing and what they have, because this is not a race to the finish to see who has more, because as everyone knows, it's not what you make, it's what you spend. And so we really need to get an idea of what it is you're going to spend in retirement before we can talk about any gap that needs to be covered. And so that's why I would say, if you're going to meet with a professional, which as you'll see as we go along here, it really is helpful to do that. Whether or not you do business with that professional, it is important to at least start having a conversation that brings an objective party into it, especially when it comes down to wants versus needs. You can put a list together of the things that you need in retirement, and some of us would be able to say, well, that's really a want. You can have wants and needs in retirement. Going back to the first question, what does your retirement look like? But it's healthy to know the difference between the two. And sometimes, just like a good parent teaching a kid how to balance their budget or to balance their checkbook, it is important for us, no matter what our age is, to have that conversation with a trusted professional, and not necessarily a friend or a family member, because they're not going to tell you the full truth, or they're going to make the truth much worse than the reality. You don't have enough money. I have 2 million. You only have 1, or whatever, or 100,000 or 400,000. But it's not about the final number, and it's not about the percentage. Think about how your expenses are going to change. At age 65, do you want to have a mortgage? If your house is paid off, you just freed up and given yourself a raise in a sense, right? Because you don't have to make that mortgage payment. Of course, the offsetting factor is healthcare. Healthcare is going to go up as we age. We have more needs, and things start to go wrong with our bodies, and we need to have them fixed, and that costs a lot of money. So you're going to have ever evolving expenses as they change. And I understand as I'm talking about this stuff that it gets to be kind of humdrum and boring. It's also part of the drawbacks of doing the virtual seminar. I don't have your faces to feed off to see what's hitting home and what's not. But I really stress how important this conversation and this seminar that we're having is, as far as your ability to sleep at night goes. When you retire, you want to be able to, unless you have lots of pain that's keeping you up at night, you want to be able to sleep like a baby, knowing that you've planned well, and that if there's something that comes up that's unforeseen, you can pivot and be able to handle it. So in the early years of retirement, you're probably going to travel more. You may have hobbies that are a little bit more expensive. Maybe you want to refurbish or restore an old vehicle, things that require faculties. So that all happens early in life. You might have grandkids that are young but live several states away. You might want to travel the world. And so those expenses are going to be very different than what you had prior to that. So we want to make sure that you're working to develop an understanding of what kind of special fund you might need, savings account, et cetera, to consider as you're planning for your post-retirement activities. So list your expenses. I would encourage you, going back to where I started with this, to have a list the first time that you meet with an investment consultant or an advisor or representative. Have that list of expenses ready to go. If you don't, they're probably going to ask you to go through it right there on the spot, and that takes time. Most of the time, the first meeting you're going to have with someone, if you haven't met with someone yet, you'll spend about an hour with them, getting to know them, and they'll get to know you, and you can see if they have their feet underneath of them and they know what they're talking about. Are they too salesy? Are they too pushy? Is there obligation that's coming out of the conversation? So, but very much a meet and greet and get to know each other. But if you have your expenses listed out that you expect to have in retirement, then that will take and free up some valuable time just to get to kind of know each other a little bit and establish some rapport so that a true conversation can happen. Okay, so we're still on slide 1, accounting for healthcare costs. Not slide 1, we're still on piece 1 of the pie chart. So when we're accounting for healthcare costs, obviously a lot of this is common sense. Like I said, your healthcare declines, and so costs of healthcare go up. Medicare coverage starts at age 65. Medicare prescription drug coverage is included. There are Medigap policies. I'm not going to make this a Medicare seminar, but just know that at age 65, you want to, or as you approach age 65, you want to start doing your homework as far as what your specific supplemental policies might be. There is some specialization in my world. You do have there. I've heard some former retirement representatives out there now advertising that they do healthcare coverage. They're just getting into a part of planning that maybe there's a need for, but we're not all great at everything, and myself included in that. So there is some specialization that occurs. So if you have questions, you might want to seek out a representative or an advisor who specializes, or certainly call Social Security and get put on the phone with a Medicare specialist. Those are all options to begin. But one thing that I will tell you is that sometimes people think that Medicare will cover long-term care. And not to scare you, but long-term care is a scary issue. There's now, for full care, I think between $10,000 to $12,000 a month is what goes into a full care. I had a grandfather, age 97, pass away, 6 years in a nursing home, full care, and burned through about $400,000. So there are, for those of you who are concerned about leaving money to an heir or a charity, long-term care can take that dream and take it away pretty quickly. So I want to make sure you know that Medicare does not cover long-term care. So how do we account for the cost of long-term care? It's very, very hard because long-term care costs are increasing exponentially to the point where a lot of our policies, long-term care policies, are asking for people to increase their premium payments because the actuaries kind of got it wrong on how quickly and how much these costs would go up. So your options for long-term care are you can pay it out of pocket. You can rely on Medicaid, which requires that you spend your assets down to, I think, $2,000. So you basically have to be below poverty level in order for the state to cover your Medicaid or your long-term care coverage. Now, depending on the state, we're lucky in North Dakota because I think, from what I understand, we take care of our elderly pretty well still. But you could be in an urban population, and maybe that means that you go from the nice room into the room with 3 people, and I'm not going to say coverage is or care is different, but I think there's plenty of people who would point out that things change once you move on to being a ward of the state. Long-term care insurance is there again, but it's becoming obsolete. There is a fourth way that we have approached long-term care coverage, and I would encourage you to seek out a professional in order to understand that. We use life insurance as what's called a transfer of wealth program. So if you think about life insurance, you have a death benefit at the end of life. you don't need to be in the nursing home anymore. That benefit goes to the heirs. But in the case of these transfer of wealth policies, you can actually access that death benefit early to cover long-term care expenses, and up to a certain percentage of it can be used for terminal treatments and care as well. So basically, you're preserving the asset or your estate to transfer over to your heirs by relying on a life insurance death benefit. And that is quite a useful tool, and it allows us to actually predict with more accuracy the amount of money that you'll need for when you go into a nursing home. We assume you go in at age 83 and spend 2 years there. We can come up with a better way of figuring what you need. So talk to a professional about that. We are, I'm not a life insurance agent, but we do use those life insurance tools as part of the planning. So that would be a fourth approach that you could talk to somebody about. Be happy to help you with that. Okay, so what is long-term care? Quickly, we all know, I think, but it's individuals over age 65 are going to need it at some point in their lives. And here again, the national average annual cost of nursing home is $90,000. So I was out in public, and it was a loud place. It was a little get together, and I shared with somebody that they would need $25,000 a month in order to cover their long-term care given their age when the time comes. It is such an incomprehensible amount of money that they heard me say $25,000 period. Oh, I've got that covered, no problem. We're talking about a month, not forever. $25,000 a month. So think about that, for instance, for a second. That is incomprehensible when you consider what your expenses are right now. All right, so now we're going to move on to slide number 2, or as I keep calling it slide, but it's the piece number 2 in our account, in our pie chart that you have for reference. So accounting for inflation. What inflation is, we've all heard it, but it's really hard to understand unless you focus on it or work in the industry of money. If you work with money, you get it. But it's a reduction of buying power. So over time, think about what a $100 bill could have bought you, in 1990, for instance. And if you pulled that same $100 bill out from, say, under your mattress at this point in time, what would that same $100 buy? It would buy a lot less. I looked at one of the things from when I was born, 1976 Quibbits, little Quibbits or whatever they're called. I guess what I was shocked by is that milk costs 25 cents a gallon, or 5 cents for a gallon of milk, 25 cents a gallon for gasoline, or vice versa. But anyway, quite a bit more expensive are things these days. And so we have to account for inflation when we're talking about our money. If you leave it in a savings account with interest rates that are paying below 1%, and we know that savings account, or we know that those rates aren't going to go up anytime soon, and we know inflation is 2.3%, that means you got to do better than 2.3% just to stay even with buying power over time. So that's the number one enemy that I look at when I sit down with people who have extra cash, is how much do we want to save for emergency needs, and then how much do you want to put to work to try to beat inflation over time. Taxes are important too. I haven't met anyone that loves paying taxes. There's a lot of arguments these days about how much we all should pay, but I think for the most part, we'd like the opportunity to keep more of our money. And so we have to figure out ways, depending on what your income is, to factor in the tax impact. And there are ways, you need to sit down and talk with an advisor or consultant, but there are ways to minimize that impact over time. And then understanding potential risk. I'm going to kind of glaze over, before you do, glaze over on what types of risk are out there. These are all things that we will talk about when we sit down together. And though they're really important, they're not really the most important thing to talk about today, the types of risk with your money. Inflation's enough to get us through the day here. Here's just a chart that shows how buying power works. So if we assume 3% inflation in 25 years, it'll cost you over $100,000 to buy the same goods and services that $50,000 would purchase today. I'll share a brief example of how this works. I have a friend who lives in Minneapolis. We grew up in Austin, Minnesota, which is a small meatpacking town, southeast part of the state of Minnesota. Really, working class community for the most part, hardworking Every dollar is earned and every dollar is accounted for the most part. So the interesting part about this is my friend's parents bought a house in 1972 for $14,000. They raised 3 children in it. They still live in that same house today. So I don't know how many times they would have refinanced it. I'm not sure, what their mortgage looked like or their payments. But my buddy then grows up, graduates from high school in 1994, goes off to college, marries a young lady, and they buy a house in Rogers, Minnesota, which is a northern suburb of the city. They paid $225,000 for that home. When he called his dad to talk about the house, and dad asked what the cost of the house was, and he told him, his dad thought that he got ripped off. He thought that he had been taken to the cleaners. He was yelling at him on the phone. And that can kind of happen sometimes if, in the case of this couple, they never really purchased another house, and you kind of get disconnected with the market and sort of how inflation works. So $14,000 in this case bought a lot. It bought a full, family size, individual family home, where it would require $225,000 just, 25 years later. Impact of taxes, there is a difference between income that's ordinary, which would be what you earn through either your W-2 or 1099. In some cases, there are differences between that as well. And then interest is taxed at a different rate. So you have to understand passive income versus active income. There are special tax rates for long-term capital gains. All of this is just to wet your whistle, in a sense that to let you know that there are people that you should talk about, that it really is important to sit down and have conversations with professionals when it comes to going beyond the point where you determine what your expenses are going to be each month in retirement. There's tax-free income. There is a problem of having too much money. I work with some wealthier people who, their stress levels about having too much money. I know it's probably a nice problem to have, but their stress levels about having too much money really are, probably equate to the same type of stress a person might have if they're living paycheck to paycheck or trying to, pay down some debt, credit card, high interest debt. There are stressors that go along with what do I do with the money I have, and how do I keep more of it as opposed to paying too much in taxes. I did work with a cancer specialist one time who said, it's kind of tough because even though I have a higher income, I have huge student loans that I have to pay. And I don't get to keep my first dollar of income until July 1. So income taxes were designed to, the first quarter is what you pay Uncle Sam, the rest is yours. Well, for higher income people, they don't see their dollar of earnings in their mind, the first dollar, until they get to the middle of the summer. And so keeping that in perspective, being aware of how taxation changes the perception of what it is you're earning and how much you can put away to save for retirement is important as well. I'm going to go back to this tax advantage accounts. That would be your IRA. That would be your 457. That would be 401k if you had it at a prior job. Those are what tax advantage accounts are. We're gonna just blow through this here. The risks are really not that important at this point in time. You do need to understand them when it comes to moving money around, but I think you'll have help. Those of you who log on today on your own time, under your own time is valuable, and you used your time to log in and listen to me. So I understand that you're very concerned and you're taking this seriously, and you should, but that doesn't mean you have to bite off more than you can chew either. We are here to help, and the moral of the story is that if you find the right person and you get with the right advisor / consultant or representative, you're going to realize that they can help you handle some of this other stuff, and that you don't need to worry. Unless you're passionate or interested in it, you don't have to worry about it. So the sources of retirement income, we talked about the three-legged stool: Social Security, employer pension, individual savings, and retirement. So you all will have employer pension and Social Security. If you are age 65 or older, you are part of what I would say is the last generation to have Social Security be able to cover up to 30% of your expenses, just taking the normal distribution into consideration where people are with their expenses. For me, age 44, I could probably just spitball it and say Social Security is going to be there, but it might start a little bit later if they do some reform, and it may cover 20% of my expenses. Now, here in the private sector, we don't have a pension. So what that means is I have to rely on a reduced Social Security buying power, effectively reducing what I can count on Social Security to cover for expenses. And it puts all the pressure then really on individual savings and investments. And so that's what's important when you're talking to younger generations, children, grandchildren, about the importance of starting to save for retirement early. There's a big disconnect between the 20-year-old, 23-year-old and the 65-year-old version of themselves, as there was for all of us. We tend to realize that we need to start saving for retirement later in life. Often it's age 40. And I will say this, just sort of off the cuff as well. If you have a twin yourself, and that twin started saving for retirement, putting into their 457 or into their defined contribution plan, 401k, whatever. If they start saving for that retirement from the age of 20 to age 40, and let's just say it was 3% of their pay. Well, let's say 6% of their pay. They're trying to get the match. So 6% of their pay goes into their 401k. If they stop contributing to that 401k at age 40, and your twin or their twin starts contributing 12%, so they double, they go from 6%, they double, your twin doubles and goes 12%, and saves from age 40 to age 65, the person who started saving younger will have, I don't know if it's twice as much, but quite a bit more in retirement after having never contributed a dollar past the age of 40. So we all back ourselves up against the wall in terms of saving for retirement. But remember what I said in the beginning, it's not a panic situation. We're not in a race with our peers, and we're not in a race with our twins. Starting at any point in time and getting yourself thinking about retirement is very important regardless of what age you are. There are some people who wait too long, but the reality is for those of you who are of that last generation that I said 30% can cover, Social Security can cover their expenses, there is a little bit of a safety net there. Having conversations with young people means, though, that they have to get started really early. We've done Social Security presentations with the actual Social Security employees. We've had representatives come in and do seminars. Some of you may have logged in or been a part of those in the past. So I'm not going to spend an enormous amount of time on Social Security, but I will just tell you that when you're considering taking it at age 62 versus 67 or age 70, it is really important that you understand how the math works on that. It's pretty easy to just say, you know what, I'm going to wait till age 67 because I understand that, and this series of slides sort of plays into that, but I want to present an opposite perspective to you today that you may not hear very often, and it plays into time value of the dollar and compounding. The earliest age you can take Social Security is age 62. Now, because I am extremely a boring individual, I did the math on whether or not you should take it at 62 or age 67 or age 70. And believe it or not, there are some factors that could come into play that maybe would determine you want to take it at age 62, even though by waiting until 67 or waiting till age 70, you get a drastic increase in your benefit. There's a little thing called mortality that plays in, and once you are gone, you don't receive the Social Security payout. You paid in all your whole life, you paid in through all your working years, and how much are you going to get out of it? That's the question. How much went in and how much is going to come out? Okay. Here's the dark secret. If a person who takes Social Security at age 62 draws Social Security until age 80, they will take out, and here the underlying assumption is that these three people I'm going to describe all made the same amount in terms of income, and they're the same age at any given time. So person number one takes Social Security at age 62. Person number two takes Social Security at age 67. Person number 3 takes Social Security at age 70. If all those things are held equal, they will all 3 have drawn the same amount of money out of Social Security at age 80. So are you going to live to age 80 or not? And if you're like a lot of people, you're going to live beyond age 80. We just talked about how much longer people are living. But there is another factor you have to consider. It's called compounding. If you take your Social Security benefit at age 62 and you don't need it, and you invest it, and I have to disclose that there's a bias here in my statement as an investment consultant, I would love to see you take any income that you don't need or any sort of extra cash and put it into retirement. Nobody gets to retirement and says, I wish I would have saved less. So what I'd like to see is people consider the math here, always knowing that when you die, Social Security turns off and there's not another dollar that's getting, under normal circumstances, not another dollar that's getting taken out of your record. Now, there are some differences or some issues that come about with spousal benefits and widow benefits and such, but I'm not really going to get into it. We're just going to say when you die, Social Security goes away. So how much did you get out of it? When I did the math on this, I calculated a 4% rate of return, which is a modest rate of return over time, on those dollars for that 62-year-old. And I found that by taking it at 62 and pursuing a moderate risk objective, risk tolerance and objective with those dollars, that you would now have to live to age 90 in order to equal out with those who waited to take it at 67 and 70. It gets a little confusing, but by utilizing compounding of returns and time value, if we're to say that we're going to live a long time, and a lot longer than our prior generations, then we have to account for time value. We have to look at the fact that we have to stretch our money out longer. Now, you take Social Security at age 67, you could still live to be 100, in which case with inflation, those dollars that you're taking are still going to reduce your buying power over time. So you might start out covering 30% of your expenses, but by the time you reach age 100, it might just cover 10, especially with increased expenses for healthcare, et cetera. So there is some value in looking at yourself in the mirror, realizing you're age 62 and accepting the fact that you could be here a lot longer and that you do have the problem of trying to stretch your money out. So what are the options? I've coached people through that decision. I'm happy to coach anyone through that decision, but at the end of the day, you have to understand the math. And just blanketly saying that if I wait till 67, I get a 25% pay increase, or wait till age 70, I get a 35% pay increase. It doesn't really work that way when we factor time value and compounding. That's all I really want you to take away from Social Security at this point in time. So this is an area that you're all very familiar with. We talked about it prior to getting on. I have two marketing representatives with me in the room, and we were talking about the idea of a pension, and if you had the choice between taking a payout or taking the annuitized $200 a month payment versus $25,000, and you do the math on how long you live. Again, it's really important to think about inflation and how much the cost of living goes up over time. So if I retire at age 65 and I can get $3,000 a month out of my pension, and that $3,000 a month never goes up, and I'm 65, but I live to be 100, what is that $2,000 actually going to buy at age 100? And so it's kind of like, hey, I won the lottery, I'm going to take the payment for life, or I'm going to just take the lump sum and pay a bunch of taxes. We've done some little games here at the credit union to see what people would do and whether or not they're conservative with their beliefs on give me my bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. I want to make sure that I get my money as long as I live. I don't want to potentially run out. Versus, you know what, give me the money now and I can do something a lot better with it and make it grow a lot better over time. So it all comes down to your risk tolerance. And when you meet with a financial consultant, that is the number one thing that they're going to try to figure out about you. What is your actual risk tolerance? And I don't mean like, okay, I grew up hearing about the Dust Bowl and I had a grandmother who hid dollar bills in those little insert ice cube trays, the special insert comes out and you lay the money down. I actually had a great grandparent do that, put $50 bills in the bottom of those things. don't trust banks, don't trust investment advisors, don't trust consultants. That is all part of the overall conversation. I'm never going to look across from you and say, oh, you got to blanketly and blindly trust me because I know everything. There are conversations to be had about what your expectations are for risk and risk tolerance, but you also have to be honest with yourself as well. If you're just listening to old voices from those people that you grew up hearing, it might be worth it, and it might be time to sit and listen to an objective professional about how money works over time. I will just share briefly one of, I worked with an individual who these people were great business owners, and one of the problems that they had was too much money in their mind. They had money spread out all over the community, and one of the things that happened is they just didn't invest it. It was in savings accounts, and so they had $1 million at the end of their lifespan. But I didn't have the heart to tell them that had they and since they were business owners, they were risk takers to begin with. But had they understood, their risk tolerance, they would have had several million more just going back in time and investing throughout time. It's something to really sit down and talk about when you're with the professional engineer. As far as your pension, I don't want to make this about your specific pension. Last year, when we talked in person, I tried to go over a little bit about your specifics, and things are changing so much that I don't really want to claim to be, an expert in your pension. But when you get together with someone to talk about it, if you provide the statement or the most recent statement, it'll be pretty easy for them to take a look into what your situation is and what if there's inflation adjustments there. Do you have qualified joint survivor? Do you have a lump sum option? Every advisor you meet with is probably going to tell you to take the lump sum, just so you know. Probably what's going to happen. And there are good reasons to do so. The single life annuity, that's just a matter of, like I said earlier, it's a matter of your comfort level. All right, so we're now on to the one slide that goes with pie piece number 4. And this is where you identify the gap. So your action item for today was really to put your income needs, expenses in retirement down on a piece of paper. See what that is. Is it 6,000? Is it 8,000? Is it 9,000? Is it 4,000? Do you need $10,000 a year for a travel fund? So those types of things. Now you can take a look at your pension income and Social Security, because most of you, if you're at retirement age, have a pretty good idea what those, we call them fixed income sources, are actually going to be for you. So you have a $9,000 income need right now, but your pension and your Social Security are only going to go up X amount of dollars. We spent a lot of time talking about the fact that inflation eats away at the buying power. So now you have to figure how much of my own personal additional income is needed that has to come from my personal savings and within my accounts, within my tax advantage accounts, within my brokerage accounts, within my savings accounts, etc. So this part of we've got about 10 minutes left, and this part of the presentation, this is now piece 5 of the puzzle, or piece 5 of the pie chart. We could spend this is the part that you get together with someone to talk about. This is really where the professional comes in. I can't really do a service to a lot of this because each of you are individuals. You each have different risk tolerances. But here are some of the things that when you do sit down with the professional, this is what you should be talking about with them. I will just say this. A lot of the investment and product choices, you got to be careful because some of us are captive. They may have to sell a specific product or work with a specific type of vendor in which costs are internal and they're not always so easy to find and see. So I would say when you're sitting down with that person, that individual, ask them, to explain costs and to explain charges and to explain the difference between fees. because most of the products that are out there for us to put you into are very similar in terms of how they approach risk, how they have what their objective is for growth over time, or whether it's balanced approach or a moderate approach. But the devil is in the details, in the sense that there are differences between fees, charges, fees and charges specifically, and a lot of times people will lump those two together and not understand the difference. When you determine what it is that you need to come from your own personal savings, you have to think about the asset allocation strategy. Where is the money coming from? Are we pulling from a fixed account? Are we pulling from accounts that right now the markets are down and we would miss the recovery of those funds if we pulled out now? We had this situation with COVID where the markets, took a dive 50%. And, if you're pulling money from accounts that are depleted in terms of their valuation, I'm not talking about losses, I'm talking about the value of the account is low. And then you realize that loss by taking those dollars out of that, you then potentially miss the recovery like we've had, relatively quickly. We're looking at the shortest, at least as of now, the shortest the shortest recession in history. There were those of us telling people, publicly, hey, don't panic, don't be moving, don't be taking out don't be moving out of your mutual funds or your markets, or don't mess with your asset allocation just yet. Stopping the bleeding is not a good idea yet, because we're going to have a turnaround, and you don't want to miss that recovery. And so, taking those things into consideration are important as well. And order of withdrawals, that usually impacts taxes. I do want to make sure that you all understand through the CARES Act, this new legislation, that required minimum distributions are now have moved back to age 72. It used to be 70 and a half that you were required to take a percentage of your tax advantage accounts in terms of income. That has all changed. So if it's been more than a year since you've met with your representative, if you may have missed that you don't have to necessarily take. Why does that matter? The IRS eventually wants its income tax. If you've done a great job saving, you don't necessarily want to take income that you don't need right now. You want it to stay and continue to work to beat inflation over time. And so that RMD age really is quite an important factor in allowing your money to outlast, or to last as long as you do. Asset allocation. At the time you retire, you transition from accumulation to distribution. Immediate income versus long-term returns. Those, that's a balancing act. How much income do you need? How much income do you want? And what are long-term returns? When I sit down with people, I try to take the emotion out of money. It's a really hard thing to do. We've grown up with such an emotional connection to money. We look at what our neighbors have, we look at what they don't have, we feel good about ourselves because we have this or we have that or whatever. But if you can disconnect yourself from the emotional connection to money, and you can actually place those dollars in a bucket, either visibly on a piece of paper or in your mind, for when those dollars will be used, we can then come up with an accurate assessment of your risk. So if I can park $25,000 in a bucket that I know I will not need until age 90, I can take a lot more risk with those dollars. It's not a dollar for dollar situation. What we try to do is have you put $1 away for retirement and pull 7 out in the end. A lot of times what happens is people think retirement is a dollar in, dollar out situation. But with those 5 economic basic underpinnings that I described at the beginning, my kids have to know before they're allowed to leave, we can understand that we can take an inherent and instinctive emotional connection to something like money, turn that off, and make sure we can put it to work the way it's supposed to. And that's what a financial consultant should be able to help you do, and allow you, give you permission to do, so that we can actually go to work and make a difference. So you do want to have an effective asset allocation plan. Asset allocation would be if one sector in the market's going up and the other's going down. We want to have money in both so that we can balance out. We want to make sure we're diversified. The eggs in one basket comes up a lot. Working with one advisor or consultant does not equal all eggs in one basket. They should be really good. We take a lot of exams and we do a lot of testing. And our experience tells us that we have to be able to diversify even if it's within the same family of funds, for instance. We still want to make sure we're offsetting risk as we go forward. In retirement, you're going to want ongoing income. So there are income plays that you want to set up and talk about. Something that gets a little out in the weeds is whether or not you take that income from those funds or you let it go back in and buy in, you know, regardless of whether the markets are up or down. You start to benefit by buying in at lower cost per share. And that's all something that you would look at based on an illustration and a specific plan for you. And then ultimately the goal is to beat that. I know we've all heard of the unseen enemy as being COVID. My unseen enemy, aside from that, is inflation. That is what I go to work with to help you fight and battle. Inflation is the enemy, because we want to keep money in your pockets and make sure it lasts as long as you do. We can go on and on and on about the types of investment products. Probably the most important thing you read is the disclaimer at the bottom there. It is as much an art as it is a science. There are products that advisors become very knowledgeable about and they go to. We try to become very, very well versed in all possible avenues of investment, but it's like anything, we become aware and we become familiar with things. And so in order for us to be able to do our job and effectively describe what it is we're doing, whether we're putting you in a CD or a bond fund, we have to know what we're talking about. And that comes with experience, and that comes with a desire to learn, because the products are ever changing. So products are always changing, and actually reputations about such products change a lot too. And one of those such products that gets a bad rap, and last year when I did this presentation, we're running, now I'll just briefly say this, all annuities are not bad. They are not an investment though, not an investment in a security. An annuity is a contract with an insurance company. And so what that means is you pay the premium, okay? So just like, think of the reverse of a life insurance policy. When a person dies, the death benefit goes out. Think of it of the reverse. You actually pay the death benefit up front, and then they're going to kick out what you would have been your premium, or what you would have made as a premium, back out to you. So there's a potential, we don't like the word guarantee in this situation, but a fixed amount of money coming out per month going forward. There's lots of ways to use those annuities. For the most part, you want to limit your exposure to them if you have any amount of risk tolerance at all, which we should, because those payments can sort of be devalued over time in terms of inflation. So we're any more questions on annuities, you can contact me. I'd be happy to tell you. There are some people running around saying I'm an annuity specialist. I'll just tell you that all investment consultants and advisors are annuity specialists. We all use them potentially as a tool for getting you to have a balanced retirement plan. I'm going to speed through the rest of this because we're out of time. We've covered a little bit. We've covered almost all of it anyway. I will just say this kind of to close. You see Tom Selleck and William Devane all over the place. Tom Selleck's telling you to use your home as a reverse mortgage. William Devane's telling you to buy gold and silver. There's nothing wrong in the right circumstance with those types of things. I don't want you to think they're gimmicks at all. Your house has an extremely large amount of value if you own it outright. And there is some leveraging potential there. Now, I would say be careful leveraging your equity to do some investing because you're trying to catch up. But there are some cases and situations where it isn't a bad idea to explore a reverse mortgage. And I would also say don't shy away from gold and silver, just for fun. So if there are any questions, please reach out to me. I think we're going to end it. There. Thank you again for your service. As state employees, it is critical, the task that you're taking on right now during COVID, and we just appreciate you for doing your part here at the credit union.